Welcome, friends, to a podcast with interesting people. Today, we're going to talk about the meaning of life. How should we live it? What virtues and principles are guides in your life? And what about death? Are you afraid of it? Or do you embrace the idea of finality of our lives? And maybe even draw motivation from it to live the life to the fullest every single day. So we're going to be tackling these philosophical questions. As in our modern life, we live in such hyperspeed, and sometimes we are struggling with the question of how to live our lives, how to be happy, and what does it even mean to be happy? And what better person to ask these questions than a philosopher? And so today our guest is Bill Ferraiolo, who is the author of a book titled A Life Worth Living, Meditations on God, Death, and Stoicism. A collection of ruminations, as he puts it, about Stoic philosophy, the existence and nature of God, and the inevitability of our mortality. So stay tuned, listen, learn, and share with others whatever resonates with you from this fascinating and revealing conversation. Thanks. How are you, Bill? Welcome on the show.
I'm doing well. I'm going to get these headphones to fit yet. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So today we're going to be talking about life, death, God, Stoicism as a philosophy, and Stoic wisdom. You wrote a book about a life worth living, meditations on God, life, and how did you why did you write the book?
It's Meditations on God, Death, and Stoicism.
Thank you. Meditations on God, Death, and Stoicism. Yeah, let's not forget about the core of the dish.
Right. There's a sense in which it kind of came together by accident. It's mostly a collection of articles that I've published over the past 20 to 25 years, just in a variety of different academic journals, a couple of non-academic outlets. But my previous book with John Hunt Publishing did better than they expected, and I thought, well, I'll run this by them and see if because no one reads academic journals, so it's not like anyone would have seen any of it. And I compiled it, a little bit of light editing here and there, and they seemed to like it well enough to give me a shot with it. And so now we've got this book. It looks like this, and it just came out. I hope it's not too much of a hard sell. Going the wrong way. Just came out about a week ago. Yeah, I don't know. I'm bad with this. And, there it is. That's Seneca on the front there, allegedly. Seneca the Younger, great Stoic philosopher. And I just hope that I can encourage people to pursue Stoicism as part of an ensemble of methodologies for dealing with anxiety, depression, needless worry, maybe problems associated with irrational expectations, other sort of dysfunctional psychological states. And also, there's some stuff in there that's not directly about Stoicism, some arguments pertaining to the existence of God, arguments pertaining to the proper attitude toward death. I hope it's helpful. I hope someone out there benefits from it.
Well, reading your book, I definitely had some interesting thoughts that came up with it, and what I love about doing these conversations is just getting different perspectives from different people. And although I wasn't as familiar with Stoicism as a philosophy, I knew about it, and what always fascinated me is their perspective on death. And you write about that in a book as well, and Yeah, tell me, what is their position? Well, actually, no. Before we do that, why don't you just, if you can summarize the philosophy of Stoicism before we dive into specific Stoics and what they were thinking. What is the philosophy? What is that philosophy all about? If you would summarize it to someone who never heard of it and is just newly introduced to it.
Yeah, I've got kind of an elevator speech about it. It's a system of applied philosophy. The purpose of the philosophy is to help you deal with psychological and emotional challenges. The goal is eudaimonia, which is just a fancy, pretentious philosopher's way of saying living a good life, a flourishing life, a virtuous life. Eudaimonia is a Greek term meaning good life. Mm-hmm. And the cardinal virtues, according to Stoicism, are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance or self-discipline. The fundamental idea is that those are within our power. Our pursuit of wisdom, our attempts to be courageous, our attempts to be just, our attempts to discipline ourselves mentally, physically, in other ways. Whereas most of what we tend to concern ourselves about, most of what tends to drive us up the wall, are actually conditions that lie beyond our control. Conditions that the Stoics refer to as externals. Anything that you cannot determine just by force of will, just by deciding that it is to be so, is an external. Given that it's beyond your control, given that you cannot cause externals to be as your pre-existing whims or pre-reflective whims might incline you to desire, you should let go of those desires and you should focus all of your energies and all of your efforts on things that lie within your control, which the Stoics call internals. And the internals are essentially just those things that are subject to what they call the prohairesis, which again, pretentious Greek word. It just means your faculty of deliberation and choice. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't want to lie, don't lie. You can control that. If you want to become a billionaire, you've got an irrational desire, and you've got a desire that is susceptible to dissatisfaction. You can't control whether you become a billionaire or not. You can work hard and you can try and invest wisely, but the market's beyond your control. How people respond to your goods and services are beyond your control. So stick to the things that you can directly control. You're a married guy, I'm a married guy. I do not want to be an adulterer, so I will not be an adulterer. That's entirely up to me, right? Right. Whereas if I want my kids to be happy all the time, if I want my wife never to suffer in any way, never to become sick, that's irrational, and that's inviting despair. That's inviting dissatisfaction. That'll be a long elevator ride.
Right. So you're an academic. You've been teaching philosophy. What drew you to Stoicism?
That's another long story, but I'll give you the short version. I destroyed my left knee at wrestling practice on my 18th birthday. I had an ROTC scholarship, an Army ROTC scholarship, and my plan was to make a career of the military. Once I destroyed a weight-bearing joint, they didn't want me anymore. I was 4F or whatever they call it these days. So my college was no longer paid for. My chosen career, the career I'd hoped for, gone, unattainable. I was taking some courses because they fit my schedule, really for no other reason. And two of them were in philosophy. And I discovered that I thought I had something of an aptitude for this stuff, and I really enjoyed studying philosophy. So I kept taking more courses, kept trying to figure out what I could do with a philosophy degree. I asked one of the professors at Rutgers, can I make a living doing philosophy? And he said, no. But I just stuck around and I applied to grad school, ended up at the University of Oklahoma, stumbled around. After a few years, somebody shoves a PhD in your face. They say, go get a job. And I said, how do you do that? So I applied everywhere. And next thing I know, in 1997, I'm hired at San Joaquin Delta College. It's in Stockton. I live up the road in Lodi. Are you a Creedence Clearwater Revival fan at all?
No, no.
Oh,
Outside of my realm. Sorry.
oh, okay. So CCR had this song, I guess back in the 70s or 80s, and "Oh Lord, stuck in Lodi again." That's where I'm stuck, Lodi. But it's not so
Hello,
bad.
right.
Yeah. I moved here when I married my wife Jennifer, which is by far and away my greatest achievement and my proudest moment. She's a wonderful woman.
So one thing led to another, and you end up taking a bunch of philosophy courses, and that kind of started shaping your personality or yourself, and here you are now teaching it. How did you was Stoicism the first one that you kind of connected with, or is this just one of philosophies in your life? Do you blend philosophies, or do you stick with one with Stoicism?
Well, let me start with this part of it. When I was in graduate school, I didn't study any Stoicism at all, or almost none. Stoicism is something I came to because in my mid 30s, my early to mid 30s, I began to experience very, very unpleasant symptoms of a fairly significant anxiety and depression disorder. My life was falling apart. I was miserable in lots of different ways. And I happened to stumble on the discourses of Epictetus, and it flipped a switch. I knew this was part of the answer, part of the way of managing my dysfunction, my difficulties. So since then, I'm about to be 51 in about a week. So actually, even sooner than that. So for about the past, I would say, 15, 16 years, I've been reading everything I could get my hands on concerning Stoicism, Buddhism, and cynicism. I'm a big fan of cynicism. I'm probably as much a cynic as a Stoic. I definitely sort of lean towards the Epictetus / Diogenes school of Stoicism or cynicism. And yeah, a bit of Buddhism is also helpful, I think. I'm not much at Buddhist meditation. This is why I tend to write my meditations out. But, gee, did that answer any of your question?
Yes. No. It's so you picked several different types of philosophies that kind of resonate with you. Why did you write a book about Stoicism specifically? I mean, reading your book, I see how Stoicism kind of grounds you. It has that kind of feeling of grounding you, and not kind of blowing things out all over the place. They're like, Stoicism. I mean, almost true to its name when you even use the word being a Stoic, and very grounding philosophy. What drew you specifically to Stoicism? To write a book about it.
Right. So specifically, the centerpiece of Stoicism is learning to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot control. Learning how not to allow yourself to be driven mad, driven to distraction by all the things you can't control: politics, economics, what other people think of you, what other people say about you, etc. And just focusing on doing your best to be a virtuous person, to attain greater wisdom, to attain greater self-discipline, self-control. When I was at my worst, I was allowing my emotions, my drives, I was allowing external affairs to dictate my mood and to dictate far too much of my psychological states and my various trains of thought. I knew I wanted to regain much more control over that. I wanted to, ideally, I would like to be imperturbable, just the kind of guy that can't be thrown off balance, can't be knocked out of a state of calm and serenity. I'm a long way from that, but ideally, that's what I would like. And that's what Stoicism holds out, if not the promise of, at least the possibility of.
Right. So I see how that kind of folds into and helps with everyday life and living. When like a lot of times people get frustrated or depressed or I guess maybe they have anxiety about the future because they project things into the future, right? They have certain like, oh, I should be a millionaire, or I should be this or that, or they constantly compare themselves, especially nowadays it's so easy to do that when you have social media constantly in your face and everyone is seeing and comparing people, and then they feel bad about themselves because they essentially just try to, compare themselves, and then like, oh man, I suck. Like look at all these people; they're so successful, and then they're projecting like, oh, I should have been this, I should have been that, and so focusing on virtues, focusing on some of the principles that Stoicism brings, helps you ground. That's how I was taking this book when I was reading it. It helps you ground yourself so that you don't suffer from those kind of projection based maladies or stress. So how specifically does the wisdom of the Stoics how does it specifically work in your life? What are you taking in? Give me some examples, if you will, like your top 3 tips from the Stoic wisdom that keep you grounded on day-to-day basis, and things that don't let the life get to you. How does it help you?
Okay, if you want a couple of simple slogans or simple maxims, one way to put it is recognize that the world will always have its way. The world out there, the external world, always wins. Fighting it, trying to resist it, is a losing battle. If you insist that the world of politics must go thus and so, or this team must win the Super Bowl, or this person must love me, or this job, I must attain this job, you're just inviting frustration, inviting anger, inviting despair. Because all of that stuff, that's up to the dispensations of the world, or God if you're a believer, or certainly these powers beyond your control. What is up to you is how you respond to, how you psychologically and emotionally respond to the facts as they present themselves, right? Conditions are as they are. My job, when I'm being a good Stoic, which I often am not, but my job is to respond in rational and virtuous fashion to events as they unfold, however they unfold, because I can't control any of that business. So there's one fundamental lesson. Lesson number 2 is being virtuous is more valuable than, and is better than, anything for which you might be tempted to trade it. Don't trade your virtue away for money. Don't trade your virtue away for power. Don't trade your virtue away for fame. Don't trade it away for sex. Don't trade it away for any of the things that people will, degrade themselves for if they're tempted under the right circumstances. Being a decent human being is better than being a billionaire. Being a decent human being is better than, being king. There's the famous story, it's probably an apocryphal story, probably never happened, but allegedly Alexander the Great came to see Diogenes the cynic. And Diogenes, famously, he slept in a wine cask or a barrel. He owned almost nothing. He was entirely disinterested in civil customs and taboos and stuff like that. And so Alexander the Great shows up, and he says to Diogenes, tell me anything you desire, any boon you would like me to grant you, and it is yours. And Diogenes looked at him and said, stand out of my light. In other words, the idea that I don't need you, pal. I know you're the most powerful guy on earth, and you're rich, and I know you can kill me, blah, 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 and you're a great warrior, but really, you've got nothing I want, except right now you're blocking my light. Could you step aside? I don't need the money. I don't need whatever you have. And allegedly, Alexander walked away saying, were I not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes, because Diogenes had conquered himself. He had conquered his own frailties, physical, psychological, emotional, weaknesses, whereas Alexander the Great, he merely conquered the world. But what's that compared to conquering oneself?
Did non-attachment fold into that? I remember, I think I saw the how this image was portrayed, of him being in that, living in that barrel. That I think that was famously kind of illustrated somewhere.
Yeah.
Does attachment somehow fold into Stoic philosophy as well? Is there anything about attachment?
Are you asking me about non-attachment?
Yeah, non-attachment. Yeah.
There's a chapter in my book entitled Roman Buddha. It's about the similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism, in particular between the Buddha and Epictetus. And I try to make the case that when it comes to their practical counsel, it's very, very similar, almost indistinguishable in terms of guidance regarding what one should do, should not do, what one should allow oneself to be attached to, and what one should not allow oneself to be attached to. There are differences in metaphysics, but those aren't that important when it comes to the practical counsel. So, yeah, Stoics argue that you should not be attached, psychologically or emotionally dependent upon. Your serenity, your peace of mind should not be dependent upon externals, which means anything pertaining to other people, anything pertaining to the world around you. In fact, even conditions pertaining to your body. Even your body is external to your prohairesis, to your will, your faculty of deliberation and choice. I mean, as I always say, if the way I looked were voluntary, would I look like this? But no one would choose this. This is clearly not anything anyone would want. I'm getting old now, older. I'm getting gray. I am not bald. I shaved my head. A lot of people think I'm bald. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
For 51, you're looking great, man. I would not give you 51.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, but I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I have a lot of injuries. I used to play football and box and wrestle, and I've had my knee reconstructed twice. I've had my neck reconstructed. So I don't know what I look like. I don't much care, but I feel every day of 51. But hey, and that's going to happen, and we all know how it ends. I mean, my next book that's coming out in a few months is called "You Die at the End." That's how it ends.
It
and
does.
We all know it.
Yeah.
So
let's speak about death, because that is part of the in your book as well, and that's an interesting topic. How does Stoicism help you out with death? What did death mean to Stoics? What kind of wisdom do they share that people can take nowadays when they struggle with the concept of death? I personally believe that if you embrace it, it's inevitable. We all, I think it was Alan Watts who described this, and I really love that. He said, when you are born, it's like falling off the cliff and you're going down, and you know how it's going to end. You are going to hit the ground. We all are going to get there, right? It's inevitable. And yet and if there's a big rock, a boulder that falls right along with you, people try to climb on that boulder as if that would help them, have some kind of anchor to save themselves. And yet at the end we all go. And so how do you feel about death, and how does Stoicism kind of help with the whole concept, the whole inevitability of death?
Well, the Stoic attitude toward death is that we should not fear it. It's irrational to fear it because it's inevitable. It's irrational to fear it because it's not clear exactly what is bad about death. If there are, broadly speaking, two possibilities. When your body dies, you, whatever it is that is you, your unique first-person perspective on reality, ceases to exist. We sometimes call this the extinction hypothesis. You just are no more. There's nothing it's not clear why that should be terrifying. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I did not exist before I was conceived. I'm not bent out of shape about those 13 billion years. So,
right.
If I cease to exist, I cease to exist. Whereas if there is something like postmortem persistence, if there is an afterlife, then death is, it's like changing clothes, or it's like the transition from being a child to an adolescent to an adult. It's just a next phase. Epicurus had the same kind of attitude about death. He was not a Stoic. Epicureanism is one of the sort of competitor schools from antiquity, from the Hellenistic period. But he said, I'll probably botch the quote. He said, death is nothing to us because while we are, it is not. And while it is, we are not. I think that's the appropriate attitude. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to be afraid of a condition that can't, I mean, whatever else death does, it doesn't make me a worse person. It doesn't degrade me. The only degradation I can experience is what I impose upon myself. And, once I'm dead, I presumably can't do that anymore. Certainly not if I cease to exist. Now, of course, it's easy to say these things. I'll confess this much. On January 3rd, 2014, my brother Vinny hanged himself. He committed suicide. And I did not respond in paradigmatically Stoic fashion. I wept uncontrollably for a very long time when I found out when I heard the news. And I kind of fell apart for a little while. But as they say, life does go on for the living. And I had to ask myself, all right, look, this has happened. It's a fact. Nothing can change it. What is the rational and virtuous way to move forward now and still be a worthwhile husband to my wife, a worthwhile father or stepfather to my stepchildren, my wife's kids, to be a worthwhile professor, to be a worthwhile friend? Had I just remained in a state of grief indefinitely for months, for years on end, that would have been both irrational and a manifestation of weakness, I think. The fact that I saw this as uncontrolled as I did is a manifestation of weakness, but I'll cop to it. I'll fess up to it. I'm far from perfect. That's for sure.
Well, it's the distinction is that logically we can rationalize some things, and I just, by my own experiences in my life, where I kind of vacillated but also progressed through different kind of ideas in my life, what I was following. At first I was looking at everything in a very scientific sort of materialistic way, what we can touch, smell, sense, and that's the reality. And objectivism kind of folded into that as well as a philosophy. But then there's this aspect, this component of emotions that is undeniable. And we can rationalize certain things. We can say like, oh yeah, that doesn't affect me, or it's irrational. But yet emotionally we still feel it, right? That's the component of humanity where we are simply emotional and we just don't have control over that. And it's more difficult for men in a way because we are always told that you're the tough guy. You're supposed to be a tough guy. You suppress your emotions, and I think that's why men live a little bit shorter than women, because like we just suppress these feelings and just like Bill Burr, and I know you're a fan of Bill Burr, said in one of his stand-ups, He said like, yeah, that's why men, we don't live that long because as long as women, because like we suppress all these feelings, and like you're gonna hug a puppy and get him all emotional about it, and so
crush it all down into a ball.
Right, that's right. I love his skit. He's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's comedian's place in reality is just so needed, and I really enjoy him because like he can distill all these different things that we have that can't be spoken of, and he can still make it funny and deliver it. So it's the distinction between the emotions and the rational approach to things. It's easier said than done with the emotions, with the logical part of our brain. We can kind of like, okay, yes, we're all gonna die, we're gonna progress, and so on. I'm not gonna let this kind of affect me. But then again, we have those emotions, and so it's still kind of difficult to deal with that.
Yeah, I think Stoicism, as well as other wisdom traditions like Buddhism, like Cynicism, it holds out the opportunity to learn to be less intensely affected, to diminish the duration of the effect of the really negative emotions, the negative passions that cause us, that are not only intrinsically unpleasant, but often cause us to do regrettable things. So intense grief, intense hatred, rage, things like that. Hopefully we learn over time to notice what tends to trigger those kinds of emotional responses, passionate responses, and we learn how to challenge the underlying beliefs, challenge the underlying expectations, and gradually we learn to dampen the ill effects. Ideally, I would like to be able to get to extirpate the ill effects entirely. I'm not I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that to happen. But I'm certainly I'm angry much less frequently today than I used to be. I experience intense negative emotions less frequently, and they don't last as long as they used to. That's part of what was ruining my life in my 30s. I was often very angry or very emotional in a very unpleasant way. It still happens, but I can usually reason my way down off the ledge, so to speak, in relatively short order.
How does that happen for you? How do you? What are some of the techniques that you use in order to do that? Because emotions typically override our cognition, right? The higher brain functions when our reptile brain kicks in. You have fight or flight type of responses, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by emotions, and those emotions kind of cut us off from the logical part when we can rationally do that. So it's still you still need to kind of, I don't know whether it's by habit or by training. How do you allow your brain to do that rational part so that you can avoid these negative outcomes of bad emotions?
Yeah, and part of the difficulty is what you specified there. The limbic system, and I'm not going to pretend to be a neurologist or anything, but the limbic system, where we get the fight or flight response, where we get some of our very intense drives, it's fast and it's strong, and very
Right.
often it is already in motion before our prefrontal cortex, before our reason can catch up. But our reason can take note of what's going on and challenge the underlying beliefs or expectations that may be leading to the unpleasant emotion. I've got a good example for you. I was getting ready to go to my brother's funeral. I had to catch a flight, and I was standing on the front porch. I was waiting for something, I forget what. And I noticed as I was standing on the front porch, I was becoming increasingly angry. I was getting really enraged. And I looked around, and the couple was walking their dog, and they were clearly enjoying themselves and having fun. And a kid rode by on a bicycle, enjoying it. It was a nice, sunny, pleasant day. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, the anger that I'm feeling right now, it cannot be rationally motivated by anything that I'm seeing, hearing, anything I'm currently experiencing.
Right.
What is the underlying mechanism? What is the underlying belief or expectation that could plausibly be causing this? And after a while, I realized what was making me so angry is that these people had the audacity, they had the temerity to go about their business as if nothing had happened. And of course, you realize right away, well, that's irrational. They didn't know my brother was dead, and they never met him. So yeah, of course, they're enjoying their lives. On the inside, I'm full of this emotional turmoil, but they don't know that. They have no obligation to know that. They have no obligation to behave as I would prefer. And really, what behavior would I prefer? Do I want them to weep and wail and gnash their teeth? Would that be better?
Right.
So I was able to, in relatively short order, comparatively short order, kind of let go of that feeling. I thought, oh, wait a minute. I'm expecting everyone to feel my pain. Of course, that doesn't happen. That's an irrational way to approach the world and other people. And it didn't immediately go away as like flipping off a switch, but it dissipated fairly readily, given the intensity of the emotions and given the sort of uniqueness of losing a sibling.
Right. Is this like a habitual thing that you do? Are you? And we're going to talk about what you talk in your book, which is the IDEA method, which is an acronym. And what other kind of habitual things do you do to kind of bolster that capability of being able to rationalize things even in the heat of a moment of emotions?
I habitually introspect, especially when I'm in the grip of a negative psychological state. If I'm angry, if I'm feeling intense anxiety, anything of that nature, I always ask, okay, wait, what is the real cause of this, right? Is it that some guy just cut me off on the road or flipped me the finger? Is that my students aren't behaving properly? Is there some issue regarding money? Or is it something internal to my psyche? Am I just inclined to be triggered in a negative way by events of this nature? right? Events of this nature are going on all the time. They happen to other people all the time. I don't get upset when I don't get upset when students are talking in some other professor's class and disrupting his lecture. It's they're disrupting my lecture. They're interfering with my desires, my goals, my expectations. All right, so the problem's in here.
Right.
So that's the I. Identify the real issue. Then I distinguish between internals and externals, right? Whatever the external affairs are, the reasonable question is, what is within my control? What can I do right now that can diminish the negative experiences, that can diminish the irrational anger or the irrational anxiety? E refers to exert effort on that, exert effort where it can be effective. I can't change the world out there. All I can do is work to be rational, work to do the right thing, to be virtuous, to maintain serenity as best I can. And then A refers to accept the rest, accept the state of the world. There's a Nietzschean phrase, amor fati, learn to love fate, learn to love the fact that the world is as it is, however it is. Because one of the crucial things about the way the world is it's anthropic. You and I get to be in it, and it didn't have to work out that way.
Right.
Anybody can be grateful for the easy stuff, the pleasant stuff. If you can learn to be grateful I've got another book coming out later called God Bless the Broken Bones. If you can learn to be grateful for the broken bones, metaphorically speaking, if you can learn to be grateful for the opportunity to experience grief and loss, for the opportunity to have experiences at all, then I think you've made real progress.
The what is there? Yeah, the last point that you made, which is very, very important. I think in our reality, everything is based on sort of dualities. You have light and darkness, yin yang. You have good and bad, and one defines the other. Life and death, right? There's no singular thing. There's the non-duality is what's outside of it. It's transcendent. But in our world, it's one defines the other, and so necessarily you have to, in a way, accept them. And because without one, like if you wouldn't be sad, sometimes you wouldn't know what happiness is, because one defines the other. One helps you, be in the other state. And so it's important to kind of accept that, not try to extinguish it in a way, I'd say, because if you would be just constantly, if you would have all the resources and everything just to constantly make yourself happy, then you at some point would still be unhappy, because you wouldn't have the juxtaposition, you wouldn't have something that contrasts it, right? And hence we have billionaires who are depressed and
right.
and all of that, because they lose that. So I think it's important. And that was like the last point that you mentioned, the acceptance of the world as it is, accept the rest, amor fati, love the state of the fact of how the world is, and accept it. And
right.
yeah,
No
matter how it is, yeah. Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. There's only so much you can change, and there's some things that we are stressing over, and those are the things that we can't change, right? And so
right.
what's the point of it? So rationally speaking, right. it's like, hey, I'm just have to accept it. Maybe I'm going to do something towards it, but I accept it the way it is right now, and I think that's part of that part of dealing with it.
Yeah. Rejecting reality as it stands doesn't change it. It doesn't help, right? If I insist, no, the world must not be as it is. Well, first of all, who the hell am I to determine how the world must be? And how ungrateful is that? The world must not be this way or that way. The world didn't have to have me in it. The world didn't have to have life in it. The world didn't have to have so much as an amoeba in it. And we have this rich panoply of experiences. And some of them are unpleasant, and like little 4-year-olds, and I'm including myself, like 4-year-olds throwing a temper tantrum when things are challenging or difficult or unpleasant, we respond by saying no. Well, what, I don't want to go through life as a 4-year-old. Learn to not just accept, but appreciate the fact that, yeah, like right now my back really hurts, and I'm inclined to be, I don't know, upset about that. I'm inclined to be dissatisfied about that. But first of all, I didn't have to live this long to allow my back to hurt. I've already outlived Jesus. I've outlived Alexander the Great. And I think of all the people I've already outlived who never got to have the problem of having a 51-year-old back. And secondly, I can walk outside. I can turn on the TV, turn on a computer. I can see people whose difficulties outstrip my own by so far that I should be ashamed of myself for complaining even inwardly about a back that's tweaked. Really?
Right.
You know,
Right.
look at the soldiers who come back from the Middle East missing limbs and with PTSD, and you know, look at sub-Saharan Africa, anywhere you want. Look at Southeast Asia. I went down to Guatemala some years ago. There were people who voluntarily cut off their own limbs because it helped them with begging. It helped them get more alms money. And gee, my back is tweaked. You know, you see the experience of most of the rest of the world, and certainly most of our ancestors. And I sometimes say to my wife when we're seeing someone who's really got it rough, I turn to her and I say, "Remind me never to complain about anything ever again." You know?
Right. It is refreshing, and I think it's very therapeutic for people to go out and travel and experience the world outside of the States and outside of how good we have, because we're constantly bitching and complaining about things, and you really only when you go out there and you see how people live in poorer parts of the world, and that really strikes you deep, and you're like, what the heck am I complaining about? I got a roof over my head. I got food. I got water. I got entertainment. Everything at fingertips. Like, we live better than kings in medieval times, and so
exactly. Think about this technology we're using right now. One generation ago or earlier, this would be indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
And we take it for granted.
Whose quote was that?
I just said it.
Yeah, someone said it. I forget who. Someone said that, you know, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that certainly is so.
I didn't realize I was plagiarizing it, but now that you say it, yeah, it might have been.
Well, not plagiarizing. It just resonated with you, but it might have been maybe it was Isaac Asimov or someone like that. I don't know. We'll look it up. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. But I don't want to get. I don't want to get in trouble.
No, but it is true. It is true. So just that contrast of, like, when you see how terrible things are in other places, that you get to appreciate really what you have, and if that doesn't straighten you out, then I don't know what will.
Yeah, I really wish, especially, I don't want to pick on a whole generation, Generation Snowflake, the millennials, who are constantly triggered and constantly offended, whatever that means. I always want to, say, listen, hop a flight to South Sudan and go talk to a kid who watched his parents murdered in front of him, who now subsists on a handful of rice a week and also has malaria. Tell him about how somebody, made some sounds that upset you. I'm sure his heart will break for you. I don't have much patience for that kind of pathetic weakness, even though I'm guilty of it sometimes myself. I'm always, when I find myself being emotionally weak in that way, I just want to punch myself in the face.
It's so Stoics were striving at the principles and virtues. What virtues were near and dear to them? What were they pursuing?
Yeah, well, the big ones are the four cardinal ones, which are wisdom, courage, justice, fairness in dealing with others, dealing with oneself, and temperance. I prefer the translation self-discipline. The idea is, courage. There are at least two different types of courage. There's martial courage, the kind of courage we need on the battlefield, or when there's a physical confrontation. And hey, Dominic Reyes is going after John Jones' belt tonight. Don't miss it. There's that kind of courage, but there's also moral courage, the courage to say and do the right thing, even when you're going to meet with disapprobation, even if it might cost you your job, even if you might become ostracized as a result of it. I think these days We need to rouse our moral courage, because there are so many people trying to silence those with dissenting views. The constant attacks on free speech, especially from academia, I find very troubling. Justice, it's crucial to learn what it is to be honest, fair, and decent in our dealings with other people, not to take advantage, even when it would be easy to do so, not to hold other people more accountable than we would hold ourselves in similar circumstances. People like to shift blame and so on. Temperance or self-discipline, obviously, you want to have a degree of physical discipline. Scarcity can always, set upon us, even here in the wealthy West. But mental discipline is even more important. You have to learn how not to be perturbed so easily, how not to be thrown off balance so easily, how not to lose your equanimity and your ability to think rationally quite so easily. And then finally, wisdom is kind of an overarching, an umbrella concept. Understanding the human condition, understanding what is and is not within our control, and understanding the value of the attainment of virtue. All of this is part and parcel of gaining wisdom. Of course, there's more to it, but this is kind of a nutshell presentation of the cardinal virtues according to Stoicism.
And some of those virtues, as recently presented by Mitt Romney. Here we are in 2020. Who knows who's watching this and when? But some of that was sort of like represented by him when he kind of stood up over there and he spoke his conscience. And maybe this is. And I don't know if it's his religious background or if it's just his moral compass that he has that made him do that. But that's something that doesn't happen very often these days, right? Everybody is like, there's a lot of psychology of the masses where people will just kind of go along with a lot of things that are just in the torrent of the modern world, and not really cling back to those virtues. What do you think? Go ahead.
I was going to say, especially among politicians, it's very rare to hear a politician speak a truth that he or she knows to be unpopular. Right. They will, they pander almost as a reflex. I am going to maintain a degree of skepticism about Romney's actual motivations. I'll say this: if he voted guilty on the first count because he honestly believed that President Trump was guilty and he believed he was morally obligated to speak the truth, then yeah, that's a virtuous act. I am skeptical. I suspect that he simply hates Trump and he wanted to deprive President Trump of having a unanimous verdict from his own party. I know they've had a number of conflicts in the past, and I do not believe that Romney voted his conscience, but I can't read the man's mind, so right. I will remain agnostic about the degree to which that was a virtuous act. It struck me as a very petty act, but well, that's me.
Well, I guess the history is going to tell. Maybe something more is going to come out to tip the scales one way or the other. We'll see.
Yeah.
In terms of Stoicism as a philosophy, and part of the sort of subtitle of your book talks about meditations on God. What were thoughts? What did Stoics think of God? Did they believe in God? Did they rationally accept that idea, or what's in that philosophy in terms of believing in God?
Most of the Greco-Roman Stoics appear to have been pantheists, which is to say they believed that God was everything and everything is God. Think of the universe as God's body, so to speak, and then think of what they called the logos, what we might call the laws of nature, as the mind of God. And they were also determinists. They believed that all events were ultimately determined by prior events and by the laws of nature governing events. So the universe was this great unfolding play that God had written, And each of us is, we have a minor role in this vast, sprawling, ongoing play. And our job is to play our role in a virtuous fashion. If you're the emperor of Rome, as Marcus Aurelius was, be a virtuous emperor of Rome. If you're a slave, as Epictetus was, be a virtuous slave. Unless and until you get your manumission. If you are a pauper, be a good one. If you're a farmer, be a good one. And accept the fact that all happens in accordance with God's will. Everything is happening on time as it is intended by Zeus, by nature, by God.
So this brings us to free will. Do we have free will according to Stoics?
According to most of the Greco-Roman Stoics, we do. Although the term wasn't around, I don't know that there was a great deal of debate about it. They appear to have been what we would today call compatibilists. According to compatibilism, causal determinism is universally true for all events, including all human deliberations, all human actions. But we have free will nonetheless, insofar as our actions are determined by our choices, by our internal psychological states. If what happens to our bodies, if it's determined by something outside of our psychological states, if it's determined by external constraints or perhaps internal compulsions, like say someone with, I just watched a movie called Motherless Brooklyn the other night, and it's about this guy who has Tourette's syndrome. He doesn't know that's what it's called. So he has a lot of tics, and he shouts things out that are beyond his control.
Right.
Those would not be free acts according to compatibilism. Those are called by some kind of neurological abnormality. But as for what I do say of my own accord, what I choose to say, what I choose to do, those acts are free according to compatibilism. Now, I do depart from the ancient Stoics here. I cannot make any sense out of compatibilism myself. I struggle to make sense out of the concept of free will in a deterministic universe, as I believe the universe to be. So I lean towards what some people call hard determinism, which is a thesis that everything's causally determined, therefore there really is no such thing as free will. It's an illusion. But I am open to the possibility that the will could originate in something other than the natural realm. If there is something other than the natural world, if there is some world that is not governed by the laws of physics, the laws of nature, I suppose the will could originate from there. Of course, then it kind of looks random and uncaused, and it's very hard for me to make sense out of the concept of free will. But I don't dismiss it. I just say it's hard for me to make sense of it.
Right. I think Einstein famously said that God does not play dice, and then so everything kind of would have been, in that sense, would be like predetermined, and there's no accidents. Everything is here for a reason, and things are just playing out as they are supposed to play out. Of course, our own identities, our own personas that we have, in which we think we're these units of individuality, believe that we have free will, that I can do whatever I want. I can lift my arm right now, and I made it so. But was that already predetermined or not? Who knows? So that's an interesting topic and interesting thing to think about in the grand scheme of things.
I think Einstein was. I'm not absolutely positive. I think he said that in reference to Heisenberg's indeterminacy principle. I don't know that he was actually addressing free will, but the idea that there were causally indeterminate events, I think, at least at first, Einstein was reluctant to admit. I don't know if he ever did accept it, but I understand the point you're making.
Yeah. That was not the best analogy over here, or but that's probably what he was talking about. The Heisenberg's on gosh, what is it? What was the principle? It was Heisenberg's. Gosh,
you couldn't simultaneously determine the position and the velocity.
The position and spin, the position and spin of the particles. Yeah, that was talking about quantum physics and how we cannot observe both things without affecting them as well. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Yep, you are correct. That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
And so, do you think that Stoicism can come back? Is it coming back?
Oh yeah, it's coming back in a fairly significant way. I think it was 1999 or 2000, the movie Gladiator came out, and Marcus Aurelius was an important character in that movie. He was held up as a sage and so on, and he was probably the last really virtuous Roman emperor, or the last good Roman emperor. Around that same time, this book, A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe, came out, and this is largely about Stoicism and how it plays out in the lives of two of the protagonists. And then William O. Stevens wrote an essay either the same year or 1 year later called, I believe it was called The Rebirth of Stoicism. And since then, there's been a whole bunch of Stoic-themed books by people like Ryan Holiday and A. Long and John Sellers. I think John Sellers probably gets my vote for being smartest living Stoic philosopher. Donald Robertson has had some good ones out. His most recent one is this one, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, like Marcus Aurelius. Whole bunch of other people. A lot of Stoic-themed books have been selling very well. Most of them selling a lot more copies than mine, which I accept in Stoic fashion.
Excellent answer. Well, modern day and just the pace of life at which, speed of life that's happening to all of us, technology and how everything is connected and how information travels and everything is definitely reshaping our society. There's no doubt about that. Coming back to something like Stoic philosophy, which really leans on virtues and certain principles, which seem to be, very, very grounded and very solid, and they still are. I mean, they form like what you described when you were talking about virtues. Those are like the classical elements of what should be on your moral compass. However, nowadays it seems that because ideas can travel the world so fast and they can spread like virus for good or bad, this seems to have formed our society into this kind of flux of changes. People go in this way, then something else is shiny, and they go that way, and then go that way. What could take him back to those grounded principles that Stoics believed in and lived by?
I don't know that anything can or will lead the majority back to sort of root values, the kind of root values embraced by Stoicism. And I also don't concern myself that much with it, because all I can do is I can write a book, I can go on podcasts, I can talk about it, but I can't force people to be interested in what I write or to agree with me or anything like that.
Right.
I'm not very, very optimistic about the current state of our culture and what I perceive to be the probable future of our culture, broadly speaking, here in the West. I might be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. I do not believe that the moral arc of time is necessarily bent in the direction of justice and virtue. I do not believe that people today are morally better than people were 2,000 years ago or earlier. We're technologically far more advanced, but
right.
I see over the course of my lifetime, the nation into which I was born and the nation I inhabit now seem to me to be very, very different, and for the most part, not in admirable fashion. I know I sound like a grumpy old man, but
these kids today, with our internet and their virtual reality and
I don't know. I see some trends that I find to be very, very disturbing. Cultural trends, behavioral expectations. We're not becoming more like Epictetus and Diogenes and Socrates. I don't see that. I'm sure there are people who are trying to, but not in the main, not the masses. I don't think it's going well out there. But Not up to me.
How can your book change people's lives? How can your book in Stoicism, revisiting that philosophy with virtues and these grounded principles, help people kind of come back to some of and rebuild maybe their moral compass? How are you? What do you think when people read your book, or why people should read your book? I mean, the title is very interesting. The concepts that they bring in and principles are very, I mean, they are as true, like you said, 2,000 years ago as they are right now. So the value is that, people could revisit that and gain the perspective of why that worked back then and why is it still should work right now. So that's one perspective, how I see your book helping people kind of reclaim and reconnect with those principles. What else do you want to say about your book in terms of why you wrote it, and what do you hope that it will accomplish once someone gets their hands on it?
Here are a few things. One of the things that strikes me about contemporary culture is anxiety is at pandemic levels, pandemic proportions.
Right.
Something.
Why do you think that is?
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think the breakdown not only of the family, but also the actual geographic separation of families. It used to be just a few generations ago that you lived on the same street as your grandma. She lived a block over, and neighbors all knew each other, and they all spent time together, and they could sort of pull together when times were tough. Whereas you look at it today, I live in California. My mom lives in South Carolina. My brother Nick lives in Seattle. And my brother Vinny, before he died, lived in Virginia. Look at the distance separating us. If something goes wrong for one of us, the other ones literally can't get there within the space. It'll take us days to get there. And of course, we don't know what's going on in each other's lives unless someone goes out of their way to reveal it to us, and often people don't. So I think there's a kind of there's an epidemic of loneliness. There's an epidemic of a feeling of a lack of purpose or a lack of meaning. I think Jordan Peterson has done a service by encouraging young men to take up the burdens of responsibility and focus on that rather than focus on pursuing pleasures and constantly blathering on about their rights and liberties. It's obligations and responsibilities and duties that give us purpose. And it seems to me that the centrality of those kinds of concerns has largely fallen away. So I think there are a lot, and that's just a piece of the puzzle, obviously. I'm sure there are socioeconomic issues that are also not particularly healthy. I think we are all there's far too much isolation, far too much loneliness, far too much feeling of detachment. I do think the internet contributes to that. There is this feeling that other people are all doing better than we are, because when we, look at their profile on Facebook or on LinkedIn, well, they're showing us their successes, and half the time they're making those successes up anyway. So we all kind of feel like we're not sure what our purpose is. We're not sure how to get anything done. We're not sure if we're living lives worth living. It sounds like I'm just plugging my book, but we're not sure if we are doing this correctly. It used to be that mom and dad were there. They would tell you what to do, how to do things correctly, and you had some centralized value system. Hopefully, you had a fairly, adept mother and father. You had a fairly virtuous and wise mother and father. Not everyone did, of course. Now, we largely feel that we're on our own. So I think there is this explosion of anxiety. Like I was saying, something like 1 in every 3 adult Americans is taking anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants. So I want to convince people that they don't have to succumb to that. This is not a terminal condition. You can, if not cure it, you can at least learn to manage it far more effectively. You get a lot less anxious, a lot less distressed. I want to make the case that increasingly I meet people who think that if you believe in God, or if you even take the idea of God seriously, you must be some sort of scientifically benighted rube who, never read Darwin or doesn't understand anything about the Big Bang and cosmology. So I've got at least one chapter in there in which I try to make the case that there's nothing in the current sciences that proves God does not exist. And in fact, there are a lot of reasons to at least be suspicious that this universe may have been intelligently designed for the sake of complex, intelligent beings such as ourselves, which means it's at least not ridiculous or childish to perhaps believe in God and perhaps consider God as a possible grounding for, absolute universal moral facts, for universal and immutable truths of some kind, and we might try to learn what some of those are. We might try to pursue those. I think the collapse of religion is not. I think on the whole is probably not healthy for society, whether God exists or not. I think the collapse of the sort of pre-existing religious suppositions, at the very least, will lead to paroxysms of anxiety. At the very least, it will lead to significant cultural and societal disturbances.
Why is that?
If you take a society in which everyone or nearly everyone believed in anything, X, whether it's God, Christianity, Islam, anything, everyone believed in X, and this was a centerpiece for their lives. Then you take X away. You convince all of them or a large portion of them that was never true. That was an illusion the whole time. You all got it wrong. And then you replace it with nothing. Or you replace it with nothing of similar magnitude.
Right.
That is going to cause a panic. That's going to cause distress. That's going to leave a God-shaped hole, for lack of a better word. If for all the people who want to kill off religion, I request that they at least show me something that could potentially replace it, that could potentially serve as an organizing principle. There are some people in the contemporary Stoic movement that hope Stoicism can replace religion. I personally don't think it can, and I would not be rooting for it to do so. I would like
Why
to
not?
I'd like to see a synthesis of the two. I don't think there's anything about Stoicism that's incompatible with, say, Judaism. Fairly trivial things like pantheism. But even Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, makes the case that whether the gods are real or not, whether Zeus is real or not, this is still a good set of core principles. If we live in accordance with Stoicism, we pursue wisdom and virtue. And if that's pleasing to the gods, okay, all well and good. If there are no gods, wouldn't you still rather be virtuous than vicious? Wouldn't you still rather be wise than ignorant? So I would make the case that, first of all, Stoicism doesn't have the tools, the apparatus to captivate people in the way that Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism. I don't think it shares the same suite of properties that's necessary. If it does, it hasn't proven it yet. At least not in the contemporary world. But rather than telling people, look, I'm going to take this away and I'm going to give you this instead, I would rather say, keep that, keep the good parts of that, right? Like, don't kill people who disagree with you, don't oppress people who disagree with you. There's some cleaning up to do. Keep God, and here's some good advice, and I bet God won't mind if you follow it. I bet God will not punish you for attaining wisdom. I bet God will not punish you for being courageous. I bet God will not punish you for being just. I bet God will not punish you for being temperate or self-disciplined. And if God would punish you for those things, I'm definitely reading the wrong Bible.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, there's a set of universal truths, right, that people, in principles that people should follow, and some of them are along the way with faith and various faiths and religions, but even without that, they are those universal truths are still true. Like, nobody wants to get hurt, so nobody hey, do unto others what you want them to do to you. So,
that's why there's. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's why there's another chapter in the book in which I defend agnosticism. I defend it on the grounds of what I'm trying to say is, all right, let's say you're an unbeliever. Let's say you're not sure if you believe in this God stuff. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether there is or is not a God. You can practice Stoicism and embrace Stoicism and increase in wisdom and virtue, whether there is or there isn't.
Right.
There's a chapter called there's a chapter in which I make the case that it's just called God or atoms. Whether there's a God or whether there's just atoms and void and laws of nature.
Stoic counsel with or without Zeus.
There you go. Yeah.
So
I want to invite everybody in. Believers,
right.
Unbelievers,
Yeah. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed your book. I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. I think it's very helpful in kind of reconnecting people with the virtues that we are forgetting sometimes, which are stolen by all this hypnotic celebrity chasing out in the world nowadays, and people are just want to be like what they see instead of some of the things that will truly make them happy. And those grounding principles, and I think that's sort of like the biggest thing that I got out of the book, which is, how some of those things are so grounding to you. I love your idea method because it's if you can follow that, if you can follow that acronym, if you can break it down and follow those steps, it's a good tool to kind of recenter yourself and evaluate whatever is in front of you. And I always appreciate that because it's a great tool, and it's something to follow. And it's really true to its core because it's based on those principles. So that's something that people will definitely get out of your book, and I hope that more of them will be reading your book and checking it out. What is next for you, Bill? You have a next book coming. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I got 2 more coming out this year. Hey,
you're a busy man.
Before, I did a lot of writing over the last couple of years. You die at the end. These are meditations that are, each meditation is paired with a verse from the Bible, and the verse and the meditation touch on similar themes. And again, trying to make the case that what I'm thinking about, what I'm concerned with, are the kinds of things that people have always thought about and been concerned with and wondered about, so much so they made their way into Scripture. And then there's God Bless the Broken Bones. You Die at the End comes out in June, and this comes out, I believe, in September. And this is largely about meditations about learning to have gratitude for everything, including the broken bones, including the tough stuff, including the stuff that we're not naturally inclined to be grateful for. We should learn that gratitude ought to attach, if at all possible, to all of our experiences, or nearly all of them.
Right.
We didn't have to be here for any of this. So, so I've got those 2. I've got 1 more in the hopper, but I'm not going to send it to my publisher until I find out whether this new one's going to make any money or not. So, publishing is still a business. I gotta convince them that this one
that is
sells.
true.
Yeah.
Really briefly, how was your experience? I always ask this to of the authors who I speak with. How is your experience with the whole publishing process?
I think I got lucky. Early on, my experiences were, mostly filled with rejection. I sent the manuscript for the blue one. This is the one that came out in 2017, Meditations on Self-Discipline and Failure. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it sold a lot better than anybody expected, which is not to say, I'm not exactly challenging Ryan Holiday for any records, but it did pretty well. Now, so insofar as that's concerned, my experiences have been mostly positive. You have to go through a lot of rejection. You have to run your work through a lot of publishers or potentially agents. I was lucky insofar as I found John Hunt Publishing. I never had to get an agent. I never wanted to get an agent, so that worked out pretty well. And they took a flyer. They took a chance on a book with a kind of a weird title by an author with an almost unpronounceable last name. And they said, "Well, we'll give it a shot." And now they're giving me at least these 3 more shots. So I really cannot complain. See, once again, gratitude has got to work its way into your assessment of these kinds of things. How many people out there have written books and they can't get them published? No one gives them a chance. Somebody gave me a chance, and I certainly didn't have to.
Right. Well, I'm sure that your Stoic approach helped you with that as well to kind of deal with whether it's going to be rejected or not. And happy for you that it worked out. I'm super optimistic about your book. I really like it, and I can't wait for it to come out on audio as an audiobook.
Yeah, because I'm working with a guy. I'm working with a guy on that who seems like he knows what he's doing. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, I'm optimistic too, and it sounds really great.
Do you know whether that guy received the thing I sent?
Probably not yet, but he's going to look into it.
Okay. All right. Well, I have, like I said, I have a lot of confidence in this dude and the people working with him. So I'm looking good too.
I'm looking forward to listening to it, and because the book is really well written. It has a lot of wisdom in it. It taps back into the everlasting principles, and that I think a lot of people could get some strength out of. And I can't wait to see your other books when they come out, and hopefully we'll have another chance. I want to kind of pre-invite you to a show and talk about those. And I'm super excited about that.
Pre-accept.
You pre-accept?
I pre-accept your pre-invitation. Yeah, anytime. It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. I hope that people got out of this podcast some information that can take home and ponder upon. And we'll talk again. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for the rest for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
And for those of you who are listening to this, thank you for sticking all the way out to the end. We're going to have Bill again on the show. We're going to talk about his other books that are coming out. In the meantime, pick up A Life Worth Living, Meditations on God, Death, and Stoicism. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
The world is full of interesting people with wisdom and extraordinary experiences to learn from. Join me on a journey to discover them, speak with them, and learn from them. I'm Adrian Sinclair, host of A Podcast with Interesting People at apodcast.com.